of the great-grandfather, John Whittaker, Joseph Whittaker, of one of my best friends. Here is a picture of Bold Bendigo. Notice his strange southpaw stance, leaning backwards, ready to spring forwards. And for your amusement, here's a picture of my dog on the other side. And a very pugilistic chap he is as well, highly aggressive. Now I must get on to Old Q, the 4th Duke of Queensberry, and an ancestor of mine of such vigour, lustfulness, longevity, and extreme peculiarity that he stands head and shoulders above any other member of my family, except perhaps the infamous 14th century Black Douglas. Old Q was a great patron of the boxing ring and also one of its greatest fighters, Gentleman John Jackson. Here is a picture of Old Q, the 4th Duke of Queensberry. He was a notorious 18th century figure and would undoubtedly be banged up now for a host of politically incorrect doings, lechery to the fore amongst them. Even in his 80s, this testosterone-fueled forebear of mine still had an appreciative eye for the well-turned ankle. By this time he had the sight of merely one. Day by day he would sit on his balcony overlooking Piccadilly. His wizened features would be shaded from the sunlight by a parasol, which would be held by his footman dressed in the gorgeous Queensberry livery. I can see the scene now. Below at the pavement, mounted on a pony, is stationed his head groom, Jack Radford. Radford has a very good job on this planet, which is to go in pursuit of any passing beauty who wishes to inspect a little family. How did His Grace keep it up, I hear you ask? Diet, of course. Gentlemen, if any be present, forget your juicing and your irrigation and attend to the 4th Duke of Queensberry's daily diet. At 7 a.m. he regales in a warm milk bath, perfumed with almond powder. He takes his coffee and a buttered muffin. At 9 a.m. café au lait and new-laid eggs. At 11, 2 warm jellies and rusks. At 1, a veal cutlet à la Maintenon. At 3, jellies and rusks. At 5, hot chocolate and rusks. At 7, a hearty dinner of high-seasoned dishes, claret and Madeira. At 10, tea, coffee and muffins. At midnight, a roast pullet with lime punches served. At 1 a.m. His Grace retires to bed in high spirits. But at 3 a.m. he is awakened by his man cook with a veal cutlet, which with a potation of wine and water prepares His Grace for his further repose before the morning summons to his Lactean bath. Queensberry was an expert gambler, rarely losing a bet, always making sure he knew beforehand exactly what the result would be. One is reminded of a character portrayed by W.C. Fields in one of his films, who asked if he indulged in gambling, replied, "Not the way I played." My father, Francis Queensberry, was also a prodigious gambler, but the only difference between him and Old Q was that my father never had the least idea of the result of any of his speculations. And a well-known family story concerns him coming home in the early hours of the morning, having spent the night at the Portland Club in the 1950s, having got rid of £10,000. Quite a lot of money then, not nearly as much as the Duke of Cumberland lost in 1750. So there we go on that little subject. But Gentleman John Jackson, 1769 to 1845, was a hero of the olden day fighters and won Old Q's respect both for his boxing and as a man of manners. Jackson didn't cultivate a false veneer of refinement. He was naturally intellectual and courteous. And the highest in the land thronged to his boxing school in Bond Street, among whom was the poet Lord Byron, with whom he boxed and to whom he gave instruction. Byron said that Jackson was the most perfectly formed man in Europe. At 5'11" and 14 stone, he had indeed the ideal male physique. Here's a fine picture of Jackson. And in case your attention is beginning to dip, as it were, be pleased to direct your gaze to his upper inside right trouser leg, and you will see and verify that he did indeed possess every male attribute. OQ supported Jackson and helped him to make a large fortune which he was wise enough to keep. The only time Jackson lost a fight was when he slipped and broke a leg. Instead of giving up, he made a unique proposal in the history of the boxing ring. He suggested that he and his opponent be strapped into chairs and face opposite each other and continue the fight until one or other of them gave up. This his opponent, who had been losing the fight in the first place, declined to do and pocketed his 50 guineas and departed, understandably. However, the bravery of this made Jackson more popular than ever, and he and Old Q went on from success to success, Queensberry making £15,000 from Jackson's victory over a terrific Jewish fighter called Daniel Mendoza. Daniel Mendoza is the first in a long line of great Jewish fighters from the East End of London. I think his plaque is quite round the corner, actually, that we know of, up to our present times. And great Jewish East End fighters such as Ted Kid Lewis, who fought 500 fights, and Jake Berg in the early days of the 20th century, who fought 200 fights. Here is a picture of Daniel Mendoza, and you'll be struck immediately by his extraordinary stance, again rather akin to the modern karate stance. Jackson was one of the first really great boxers and a first-rate teacher. My father was of the opinion, he knew a great deal more about boxing than I do, that if you had to say who was one of the greatest fighters of all time, gentleman John Jackson would be it. He introduced the straight left, which had never really been used before, and in his academy he invited his students to try and land blows on him, but they could never get through his impenetrable guard. He outlived Queensberry by 20 years, and when he died, the prize ring lost one of its greatest characters. Now we get on to the sort of nuts of the thing, really. Cribb's second fight with Molyneux was arranged for 28th of September at Thistleton Gap. The name itself sounds warlike, doesn't it? This spot on the borders of three counties, Lincoln, Leicestershire and Rutland, was chosen so that if magistrates from any one county came to interfere with proceedings, the protagonist could jump over the hedge and continue the battle uninterrupted. Boxing was an illegal sport in those days, and fighters were liable to arrest for breaking the peace. Though in practice, a blind eye was very often turned, especially if the aristocracy were present. Around 20,000 people attended this fight and the contest, and every section of the community was present from lord to labourer, including my ancestor Charles Douglas, the 5th Marquess of Queensberry. Molyneux had been travelling the country in between his two fights with Cribb, having some considerable success in the ring. He was a formidable opponent. The fight commenced at 12:20, and the betting was 5-2 on Tom Cribb, and the referee was gentleman John Jackson himself. Here are 2 rounds from the fight, as they were written down at the time. Round 4. Rally. Hits exchanged. Cribb fell manifesting slight weakness. Round 5. Rallying renewed. Cribb fell from a blow and received another one in falling. Not very good, is it? the writer should have had more of an eye on posterity. What we want to hear is what the Times reporter wrote at the time, that when Cribb hit Molyneux in the ribs, it sounded all over the meadow as though a box had been smashed in. And that when Molyneux hit Cribb on the forehead, it sounded like an iron hammer hitting a rock. Now that tells us something. Here's a poetic account which does rather well, a little bit in the style of the earlier Theocritus poem. Thumps following thumps, blows succeeding blows, swell the black eye and crush the bleeding nose. Beneath the ponderous fist the jawbone cracks, and the cheeks ring with a redoubled thwacks. And here is a pictorial account, one such, as they say, being worth 1,000 words. This second fight only took 19 minutes and Cribb won decisively. The ring was 25 foot square, and it's extremely unlikely that seconds and bottle holders would have been so close as depicted in that picture. Cribb took £1,000 from this, his final fight, in bets and prize money, and Captain Barclay, the tall driver of the cart we were introduced to earlier on, made £10,000 out of the contest. His ferocious training methods in the Highlands of Scotland had paid off. On the 2nd of December 1811, a dinner was held in Tom Cribb's honour, and a great cup costing 80 guineas was presented to him. This cup was filled with wine and quickly passed round the assembled company. There were cries of "Speech, speech." Tom, a poor lad from a Bristol background, very nervous in such distinguished company, and aware of his inability to speak well, finally said the following: "Gentlemen, for the honour you have done me in presenting me with this cup, I most respectfully beg of you to accept my warmest thanks." Then he sat down. Less is more. Here is the cup.
Dad, the lid's not on properly.
And someone that says, "And damned be him that cries enough." I'm very proud to possess it. Gives me a link back through my family to the Tom Cribb and the great fighters of the past, and then to OQ and the beginnings of the sport, a silver thread through history. This talk deals with the days of the prize ring, and so has a natural beginning and an end. Following Tom Cribb, things declined. Boxing has always needed great personalities to sustain it, and these didn't appear anyways, not one like our hero. Corruption and greed overtook the sport, as it always has done. My great-grandfather, the 9th Marquess of Queensberry, 1844 to 1900, was perhaps the last sporting peer to connect the racing turf and the boxing ring. And he achieved the double feat, when he was a young man, of getting different weights accepted in boxing up to that point. Strange as it may seem, a very small person could be pitched against a very big person. And also of getting his own set of rules, the Queensberry rules accepted by the British and American boxing boards of control in 1866. And about that time, following these rules and their acceptance, prize fighting, bare-knuckle fighting, moved very much more to the United States of America, where the rules governing its procedure were less strict. These are the famous Queensberry rules of boxing, still in use in the ring today. And my granddad was determined to raise the tone of boxing, which had sunk low through crookedness and fixed fights. And in those days, the prize ring in the USA was dominated by Irish Americans, hostile to anything smacking of British aristocracy. So to persuade the USA